Unbind him and let him go. Jesus' words in this week's gospel lesson caught my attention in a way that they never had before. Maybe it's the events that have happened over these past couple of weeks. Maybe it's the fear and division and the blame that have seemed to become a part of our daily rhetoric. In any case, Jesus' words, unbind him and let him go, his charge to his followers, caught my attention in a new way, a way that has given me hope. Now, I'm going to come back to that phrase in just a moment, but before I do, I want to talk about the story of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead for just a little bit here. In John's Gospel, Jesus does a whole host of things, and the raising of Lazarus is seen as the climactic sign in Jesus' ministry. And like I mentioned in John, Jesus does a whole host of awesome things. He starts by turning the water into wine at the wedding in Cana. He heals the official's son and a paralytic. He feeds 5,000 people, which is a few scraps of food. He's even seen walking on water at some point. And he restores the sight to a blind man. And all of this kind of leads up to the story we hear this morning about the raising of Lazarus. Now, all these awesome things that Jesus does in John's Gospel are not meant to be merely seen as miracles. Those things are not easily explained or understood in natural ways. Rather, they are intended to be revelations. They point beyond the event itself to something else, or, better yet, to someone else. They are intended to point to God's life-giving power made known in Jesus. So, if we get too caught up in the details of the raising of Lazarus and maybe begin to wonder and wrestle with why our loved ones haven't been raised, we're missing the point. This text is meant to highlight God's life-giving work that is made known among us. It's meant to show us that Jesus invites us into a new way of life that is counter to this world and counter to the systems of death and violence in this world. Now, there are some intentional similarities between the raising of Lazarus and Jesus' own death and resurrection. You'll notice that in Jesus' resurrection, there's also a tomb and a stone that is rolled away, and there are burial shrouds and women weeping at the grave, and then also, eventually, resurrection. The raising of Lazarus points to Jesus' defeat over death, a defeat that transforms the world and our lives. And when we trust in this life-giving power of God, this life-giving work of God, we begin to move past our own fears, our own concerns, and our own anxieties that can sometimes hold us captive. As the scholar David Lose says, it allows us to defy death's ability to overshadow and distort our lives. It allows us to live in hope rather than fear. Which brings me back to that piece I was talking about in the beginning, this part of this morning's lesson that stood out to me in a new way. When Jesus cries, "Lazarus, come out," and the dead man emerges from the tomb, you'll notice that he's still bound in the strips of cloth that he was wrapped in for his burial. And it's at this moment, when the man comes out still bound in his cloth, that Jesus tells the people gathered around him, unbind him and let him go. Jesus calls upon the community, those people gathered around him to remove the strips of cloth that bound Lazarus and held him captive in death. Jesus starts the process, but then he calls upon his followers to join in the work of restoring life. Jesus invites us into and charges us with participating in God's life-giving work. Now, I've mentioned this in other sermons that I've preached when there is baptism, so if you've heard this before, forgive me, but I think it's worth mentioning because I think it's important. The former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, a former Archbishop of the Anglican Church, explains that baptism draws us into the neighborhood of Jesus. It draws us to those places where Jesus is often found. And he goes on to explain that Jesus is found in those places where there is suffering, in those places where, among those people who are vulnerable, among those who are in need or who are alone. Bishop Williams writes, "Baptism takes us to where Jesus is. It takes us, therefore, into a closer neighborhood with a dark and fallen world, and it takes us into closer neighborhood with others invited there. The baptized life is characterized by solidarity with those in need." Jesus goes to those places that we don't want to often go, those places that might still carry the stench of death. But Jesus goes to those places, begins the work of resurrection, and calls us to join him. Now, I wish that baptism was a whole lot easier. It'd be really nice if baptism guaranteed us an easy life or a successful life, but unfortunately, nothing could be further from the truth. Baptism calls us into the midst of the suffering of this world, and it calls us to bear hope to the work of resurrection and to join in God's life-giving work, join in God's work of bringing life to this world and to our communities. In a world that has experienced the massacre at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, in a world where people are fleeing their homes because they fear for their lives, in a world where people are shot and killed outside of grocery stores because of the color of their skin, we defy death by participating in Jesus' call to life, by standing in solidarity with those who are in need and vulnerable, by respecting the dignity of every human being, by seeking and serving Christ in all people, by trusting in God. This is not easy work, but it's the work that Jesus calls us to, and it's the work that brings healing and reconciliation to this world. On this All Saints Sunday, when we remember those saints who have gone before us, we remember those saints who have shown us what it's like to live into God's kingdom. Those saints who have at times taken bold steps and bold risks that have shown us it is possible to live in a way that embraces forgiveness and mercy and justice and compassion. Those saints are the folks who have shown us what it's like to live into God's dream for this world. And the best part about all of these saints is that those saints are not just found in history books or in stained glass windows or in statues or in the posters that we have downstairs in our parish hall. You should go check those out if you get a chance. But the best part is those saints are you and they're me. We are all capable of living into God's dream for this world. So we have work to do, my friends, to answer Jesus' call to participate in the resurrection that Jesus starts and draws us into, to show this community and the world that there is another way to live, a way based in life and love. Unbind him and let him go. God's work is not finished yet. God's work is never finished. How are you participating in God's life-giving work? Amen.